All right, Andy, so I thought we'd take a look at the internet weather for this week. And this is the first chart. This is the most probe ports, so it kind of gives you an idea of what ports are being scanned by sheer volume of scan probes. You know, we talk about these all the time, these ports, so I'm not going to belabor them in depth because we talk about Telnet and SSH, which are number 2 and 3. But we're going to focus in a little bit on ones that are probably more interesting. The one I thought we'd look at instead is port 8545 TCP because there has been a little bit of a change there, and that is the Ethereum. It's the Ethereum kind of port for communication for that cryptocurrency that they have on the GETH software package. So we're going to take a closer look at that. And what I tend to like to look at more so is this chart, which has the most sources probing. So we're going to take a look at port 8080 because that one's a little bit interesting. Port 5431 is confusing, and we'll kind of revisit that one because we've talked about it before. And port 5555 TCP we'll take a closer look at as well. So let's take a quick look at port 8545 TCP. This is Ethereum. The Ethereum wallet, there was a new story that came out recently about a $20 million heist over Ethereum, so that was interesting. So I thought we'd take a look at that port 8545 again. It's kind of been going on for, I would say, probably at least a year now that this has been scanned pretty heavily. It's not a lot of actors scanning it. It's a small number of actors, but they're doing it in a lot of volume. And the guys at 360 Net Lab, which is a Chinese cybersecurity firm, they determined through some of their security analysis that there's an actor that very recently was able to exploit a bunch of these Ethereum-based wallets and actually get $20 million in Ethereum cryptocurrency, which is quite a bit of money. So they found enough of these open wallets that they were able to steal that amount from them. So that's pretty significant.
What's interesting here is that the Ethereum clients are actually, they're not configured by default to be open on 8545. So a lot of these people are actually getting these clients and then they're messing with some settings.
Right.
And they're not realizing that they're now open to 8545, and there's people that are actively scanning for those ports. So
right. There's a lot of activity around there, and as you can see, it looks like there's some money to be stolen if your device is vulnerable.
It's nothing to scoff at, $20 million.
No. So let's move on to port 8080 TCP, which is an interesting one as well. This is the GPON vulnerability. So GPON router is a very popular router, mostly overseas, not so much in the US, but there are a lot of them out there. And there was a vulnerability discovered on there that allows you to basically take them over very easily. So again, NetLab 360, really good article where they talk about these multiple botnets that are exploiting this vulnerability recently. One to be aware of, if you have GPON routers in your network, that's something you'd want to take a look at and make sure you get them secured and updated. There are firmware updates to secure your device now, but there's definitely a lot of them out there. So this next one that I think it's still kind of an unknown. I don't really know what to make of this, and we've talked about it on the show before. We haven't talked about it in a while because it's really a weird event that occurs. What happens is, I want to say like every 3 or 4 days, there is a giant surge of scanning on port 5431 TCP from 100,000 devices or something, which is a lot. We were talking previously it was around 15,000 for that botnet. So if these guys are all doing it in concert so closely in time together, that's really unusual to get that many devices really quickly all scanning at once for this port. The reason it's in our chart this week is because it happened that this 3 or 4 day cycle kind of landed on today for us this week, whereas maybe last week it didn't really show up because we were in one of these gap windows here where there was no activity. So an interesting one that probably requires more study, and we actually haven't caught any of these probes in our honeypots, so I don't really have any information about what they're trying to do or what they're looking for. So this one's kind of a mystery that comes and goes. And then the last one that I wanted to point out, which we've talked about on the show before as well, is port 5555 TCP. This is the Android debug bridge. We know that there's some number of devices, not a giant number of them out there, but on Android devices, you can go into your configuration settings and turn on the debug interface, and then you could connect to that with another device. And it's just like a lot of debuggers that are out there, allows you kind of to get low-level access to the device to kind of do like set up breakpoints in code and walk through what's running on the device. And if you accidentally leave that open, somebody bad guy could find it, connect to it, and instead of trying to debug a program, they could install malware on your device very easily, as a matter of fact. So there is a well-known family of malware called ADB Miner, which stands for Android Debug Bridge Miner, that installs some cryptocurrency mining malware on these devices. And I believe most of this activity is related to that family of malware. There's probably some smaller numbers of devices also engaged in there, maybe some other malware families, but this is the big one that's really been leveraging this.
What was interesting about that is that there are actually some devices that are being shipped with that Android Debug Bridge already open and exposed. So users may unknowingly be exposed on that port.
There are some number of devices out there that have been shipped from the manufacturer with that debug port turned on, probably accidentally, and
hopefully
it's accidentally. And there's probably some number of people that have accidentally turned it on themselves and not realized, or left it on accidentally after doing something. So definitely something that you would want to make sure you disable on your device when it's not in use. And even when it is in use, don't do it over the internet.
Yeah.
You know, do it on a closed network somewhere where you know you're not going to have bad guys looking for your Android debug port.
Yeah.
So
keep it in a lab environment, and then be cognizant of the fact that it's also a worm. So if you've got other Android devices on the network, it would be a good idea to just to make sure everything's on the up and up before you actually turn that on.
Right.
So.
Right. Absolutely. All right. And I think that's all we really had for this week on the Internet Weather.